Testing. Okay, good evening, everyone. This is not the official start of the program. This is, I want everyone to look into your pockets or your purse, grab your cell phone, and turn the ringer off. Do not be that person.
Nobody knows the trouble that I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble that I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down. Oh, yes, Lord. Sometimes I'm almost to the ground. Oh, yes, Lord. Nobody knows the trouble that I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Nobody knows the trouble that I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, a long way from home, a long way from home. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost gone, way up in the heavenly land. Lord, way up in the heavenly land, where I'll steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. to stay here. No, I ain't got long to stay here.
Good evening and welcome to the Museum of African American History, Boston and Nantucket Stone Book Awards. I'm Dr. Noelle Trent, President and CEO of the museum. Let's thank singer Deborah Stevens from the Handel and Haydn Society. We did not tell her what selections to pick. We have been through some turbulent times this year. We have felt like motherless children, but lest we forget, this was a place that people stole away. This is a place that they found hope. This is a place that they found encouragement in times when it seemed like the world was on fire. So perhaps we can draw inspiration from her selections this evening. The MAAH Stone Book Award was initially conceptualized in 2017 in partnership with Kathy Stone and is funded every year through a generous grant from the Stone Foundation. The prize has evolved from one $25,000 prize in its first year to a $50,000 prize to the winner and $10,000 to two finalists in 2021. It is by far the largest prize for nonfiction writing focusing on African American history and culture. So I know there are some rumors out there that Black history is irrelevant, that it should be taken away, looked over, ignored. Well, if this book prize tells you anything, that is not a belief that we hold dear here at the Museum of African American History. Together with the Stone Foundation, we believe that Black history is American history. It deserves to be shared and celebrated. So I'm sure you're wondering what exactly is the process of how the winners are selected. And let me be clear, I have no role in the selection process. Do not come for me later. Okay, so works are published between April 1st, 2024 and March 31st, 2025, are submitted by publishers and literary agents. This year, and I know we say this every year, but it keeps growing. This year, we received 141 submissions that were reviewed by a committee of 5 jurors. Our jurors represent the finest scholars in the country from various types of institutions of higher learning, from Ivy League schools to state schools and HBCUs. Now this year, and I know we say this every year, but it's still true, was our most competitive year yet. Out of the 141, 12 made our short list, and all of them are featured on your bookmarks that you received this evening. And I'm sure you're anxious to meet this year's authors. They still won't give me a really big envelope to open up, but that's fine. Our finalists are Anna Araujo for Humans in Shackles, An Atlantic History of Slavery. You please stand. Benjamin Barson for Grassroots Democracy, Maroon Ecologies, and the Jazz Common. And the 2025 MAAH Stone Book Award winner is, this is like the worst kept secret in publishing, Michelle Adams, The Containment, Detroit, the Supreme Court, and the Battle for Racial Justice in the North. Now, let me be honest, this award would not be possible without the hard work of our jurors. Dr. Dana Williams, our chair from Howard University, William Sturkey, who's here this evening from University of Pennsylvania, Charles McKinney Jr. from Rhodes College, Courtney R. Baker from the University of California, Riverside, who's with us this evening, Karen Cook Bell from Bowie State University, who's also with us this evening. We are also grateful to our honorary jurors, Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot from Harvard University, Paula Giddings, noted writer and scholar, Paula Johnson from Wellesley College, and Lee Pelton from the Boston Foundation. Now, all of this makes this evening possible, as well as your enthusiasm and support, continued support for the Museum of African American History. But this moment is due in no small part to the vision and work of our benefactor, honorary juror, collaborator, and visionary, Kathy Stone. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you, Noelle. I have objections to the visionary. Hi, thank you, Noelle. It's an honor for us to join with you and the museum in the production and presentation of this important award. As Noelle said, I'm Kathy Stone. I'm the president of the Stone Foundation. I'd also like to acknowledge my husband, Jim Stone, and Sonia Pleasant, who's Sonia Plessett, who is the director of the Stone Foundation. For my husband, Jim, and me, this evening is one we always look forward to, and especially this year, because it's a time to take time to pause from our day-to-day activities and to think and celebrate about the writing of history and culture of the African American experience in the United States. To all of you here at the Meeting House and online, we thank you for participating. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, welcome, and I hope you join our merry band of history admirers. I realize it's not as popular these days as it might have been, but I don't think that's true around here. We have a terrific program ahead, and I have really only one simple task, and that is to thank people for organizing this event. First of all, to our jurors. You do an extraordinary job each year. Thank you for devoting the utmost attention and care to reading all of these wonderful submissions, which for the first year was only 40, and now are 140. You do take enormous care with the submissions, and then you're stuck with the hardest job of all, which is to pick the winners, because I can imagine that that's an enormous task. To all the authors who devoted your time and attention to chronicling African American Museum, African American history and culture, we thank you for your labors and for spreading the information that we all need so history never repeats itself. And finally, to Pam Waterman and Michelle Samplin-Slagato. Pam is our first and only director of the book prize. So all of the credit for creating the book prize goes to Pam. Her partner in crime, Michelle Samplin-Salgado, is the tech advisor, and all of the beautiful graphics and online design is hers. And so we are very grateful for Michelle. but we appreciate you who come here and support the museum, which deserves your support every day of the year. Thank you all for being here and have a wonderful evening.
Good evening. The history of slavery in the Americas is at once one of the best documented and least understood phenomena of the modern era. On the one hand, slavery produced vast mountains of paper, such as ledgers, ship manifests, census schedules, plantation diaries, court proceedings, and legal codes. Enslaved people appear in colonial newspapers and in the archives of insurance companies, merchants, and missionaries. On the other hand, enslaved people themselves left relatively few written records, and when they appear in official documents, it is often through the voices of their captors, traders, and overseers. The archive of slavery is therefore profoundly paradoxical, abundant yet silent, overflowing with data, yet marked by gaps, distortions, and absences. To study slavery requires not only gathering sources, but also learning to read them against the grain. That is the brilliance of Dr. Ana Lucia Araujo's Humans in Shackles, an Atlantic History of Slavery. Dr. Araujo's work is a deeply researched transnational history of slavery in the Atlantic world. Archival records from France, Portugal, Brazil, Africa, the UK, and North America comprise her study. Her work makes a significant intervention in the literature by challenging decades of scholarship that presented slavery in Latin America and Brazil as mild compared to North American slavery. Humans in Shackles is a hemispheric history of slavery in the Americas that recenters Brazil and Africa in this tragic history of the Atlantic slave trade and slavery, and gives enslaved women their rightful place in the story. It demonstrates the ways in which enslaved women resisted slavery and the important economic, social, and cultural roles of enslaved people. Enslaved women are crucial to understanding slavery as well as its aftermath in the Americas. They birthed children, nursed the offspring of their owners, took care of children, performed strenuous physical work, toiled selling food in the streets of Rio de Janeiro, Mexico City, and Havana, cleaned, cooked, sewed, seeded, and harvested, and were sexually abused. Dr. Araujo's work underscores the fact that the profits generated by slavery built the fortunes of all Western European nations and the United States by financing the creation of banks and industrialization. It underscores that slavery sustained the Roman Catholic Church and universities and contributed to the wealth of families of planters and large slave owners all across the Americas. Her work underscores the tragic history of violence, resistance, and resilience, and the importance of Brazil, West Africa, and West Central Africa, and women in this multi-century-long process. On behalf of the Stone Book Award jurors and Kathy and Jim Stone, I am pleased to present Dr. Araujo's work as a finalist for the Stone Book Award.
Good evening.
It's a great honor to be here today to receive this award, thanks to the Museum of African American History and the James M. and Kathleen D. Stone Foundation. I thank with all my heart the jurors, Dana Williams, William Sturkey, Charles McKinney, Courtney Baker, and Karen Cook Bell. You received dozens of excellent submissions. I am grateful for the attention and time you gave to my book and for selecting it as a finalist. This is the very first time in my career, indeed, that one of my books became a finalist for a book prize. And I don't take this honor for granted. Research resources to write this book, like most part of my work, have been provided by the scholarly, historically Black Howard University, my academic home, in the past 17 years. In 2022 and 2023, I was lucky to get financial support from the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton, the American Philosophical Society, and the Getty Research Institute that helped me to put the final touches in this manuscript. So Humans in Shackles stands on the shoulders of so many historians and so many people who have been here in this place before me. And historians like Dr. Karen Cook Bell and others as well, like Vincent Brown, Ada Ferrer, Toby Green, and João José Reis, all historians who endorsed my book. And you can see their words in the back cover of the book. And also my students who teach me every day, and my book stands on their shoulders as well. Receiving this award in this temple is a reminder of the long history of resistance against slavery and discrimination, a reminder of our responsibility to stay together, to resist, to fight evil, bigotry, and intolerance, and to continue researching, writing, teaching, and telling the history of Africa and its daughters and sons, of humans who broke the shackles and built sites of freedom like this one, so we can be here today. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Courtney Baker, and I have the great honor of introducing and inaugurating our celebration of Dr. Benjamin Barson's extraordinary book, Grassroots Democracy, Maroon Ecologies, and the Jazz Commons. This book places at the center of its critical geography a place dear to my heart, New Orleans, which it recognizes as an essential coordinate for understanding African American arts and culture on its own terms. Dr. Barson's book maps the sonic corridors of freedom dreams, echoing from the Haitian Revolution to insurrections in Louisiana labor camps called plantations, to communal gatherings in New Orleans Congo Square. I am particularly delighted to celebrate this work for its attention to art, and in particular to song, as a mode in which we can hear enduring plots, plans, and promises of Black liberation that continue to inform our politics and our aesthetics. Grassroots Democracy joins a mighty cohort of studies on African American music and liberation that extends, of course, to W.B. Du Bois' investment in the sorrow songs, as well as Frederick Douglass's own interest in the spirituals. Grassroots Democracy is a wonderful addition to this mighty crew. Even in this august company, Dr. Barson's book breaks the mold. As one of my fellow jurors stated during our deliberation, I consider myself to be pretty knowledgeable about jazz, but I learned so much in this book. And indeed, it is worth noting that Grassroots Democracy is much more than a book about jazz or the history of African American music. the invocation of democracy in its title signals the study's investments in the community and the communication that is both made possible through music and made discernible through sound. As the subtitle further suggests, the maroon ecologies of the Black world, especially those located in and around the Caribbean and the Gulf Coast in the 19th century, sound out something like freedom. In the book, Barson advocates for a critical listening that would hear how the liberationist score of the Haitian Revolution echoed across the Gulf even now, reverberating on Louisiana's shores amongst the free and the enslaved, the white and the Black, the Creole and the American, and the poor and the well-resourced, to establish different and resistant forms of relationality than those imposed by the American slavery regime. Through an attention to the sonic flows of this region, Dr. Barson's book exposes a network of artistic exchanges that activated oral memories of uprisings and intercommunal commitments rooted in and routed through freedom and justice. As Barson writes, quote, "Our task now is to unshackle this rich musical heritage from the arrested images that have confined it for so long, rediscovering and celebrating the bold socio-musical framework crafted by the Black and Afro-Creole musicians who fostered a thriving grassroots democracy in turn-of-the-century New Orleans." Dr. Barson, this is such an extraordinarily comprehensive and beautifully written book that encourages us to find the promise of democracy amongst artists whose creative freedom could not and cannot be absolutely curtailed by apartheid, slavery, and injustice. Thank you for this work, and please join me in congratulating Dr. Barson. Well, you did it.
It is beyond my capacity to fully express the joy and humility I feel in sharing space with the remarkable historians of this venerated tradition that are here today. Thank you especially to the jurors, Professors Baker, Bell, McKinney, Sturkey, and Williams for generously reading so many rich tomes of African American and Afro-diasporic history, and to the Stone family, James and Kathy, and to Pam, and Dr. Trent, and all of the work that goes on behind the scenes to make African American history a living and beautiful thing in these hallowed halls. As we know, modern legal systems require an answer as to who owns a melody or a song, and yet, as the Ghanaian pianist Alfred Adekwe reminds us, Ubuntu believes rhythm was always owned by the community or the ancestors. In a similar vein, I cannot claim that the ideas of this book belong to me. They are the product of those who are now ancestors who initiated me and countless others in this movement, pianist Jerry Allen, saxophonist Fred Ho, and political activist Russell Maroon Schultz. The idea of and the movement toward freedom is not the possession of an individual, but is a communally sown, grown, and harvested fruit that is carefully tended over generations. This is where the music comes from. As W.E.B. Du Bois wrote, quote, "Little of beauty has America given the world save its rude grandeur. And so by fateful chance, the Afro-American folk song, the rhythmic cry of the slave, stands today not simply as the sole American music, but as the most beautiful expression of human experience born this side of the seas." How I encountered or was saved by this music is a rather unremarkable story. I came of age in a largely segregated northern New Jersey middle school, the kind of school marred by what Michelle Adams describes as de facto rather than de jure segregation. and having a modicum of consciousness, I knew I could not and would not fit into his signature brand. I could already sense what James Baldwin described in The Fire Next Time as a white people trapped in a history they do not understand, and until they understand it, they will not be freed from it. Its predatory masculinity and latent white supremacy sealed off the chambers of the human spirit. My options felt limited, and my answer was to play the saxophone. And somehow I ended up at a jazz camp at Montclair State University, thanks to my loving parents, and was exposed to that singular spiritual heritage that Du Bois spoke of. Slowly, and then all at once, I was committed to making this my path as I found a way to traverse the walls of apartheid and spiritual enclosure through encountering jazz clubs as a teenager in East Orange, Newark, the remnants of the Chitlin Circuit. Over the years, I encountered the work of Amiri Baraka and other writers in this liberation tradition who theorized what I could only sense, the depth and power of this music. And so I chose a strange career path. I decided I would write a book about how jazz became a practice of collective emancipation, how its history carries the memories and dreams of freedom movements, both past and those unfulfilled. That, to me, remains the work before us. And thank you especially to my wife for supporting this long, arduous work, and everyone else here.
Good evening. Can you all hear me okay? Great. Michelle Adams, The Containment, Detroit, the Supreme Court, and the Battle for Racial Justice in the North. I'm a teacher, so I got to do this sort of thing real quick. How many of you you've all heard of Brown versus Board of Education, obviously. How many of you have heard of Milliken versus Bradley? Probably some of you. Okay, this book is about Milliken versus Bradley. One of the things that some of you might not know is that Brown versus Board of Education did not desegregate American schools. It did not do that. One of the things that it did do was it did overturn Plessy versus Ferguson. That's another story. But we had to wait 10 years before we got a single black and white student going to public school together in Mississippi. 1964, the Civil Rights Act desegregated American schools. Brown versus Board of Education did something different. So, but the problem was, even after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed Southern separate school districts, school desegregation was tricky, right? Because it's based on based on where you live, not just where you, so schools are neighborhood schools, they line up and correspond to where you live, obviously. And so the second they started to take a look at the North, which also had segregated schools, it's, well, there's kids in Detroit might go to segregated schools, but it's for different reasons than in the South, where kids in a small southern town might go to segregated schools because of the law of the land. We had some advancements in the late 1960s when the country was really dedicated, or more dedicated, to racial desegregation and equality. And in 1971, we got Swan versus Mecklenburg, which allowed school districts to begin busing to achieve desegregation. But then in 1974, we get Milliken versus Bradley, the subject of this book. And Milliken versus Bradley basically says that you can't bus kids from one school district to the other. So it really enshrines, if you want to just get your kids, your white kids, away from black students, go to the suburbs. There's nothing that can be done. And also, we're not going to let black people move to the suburbs. So we're going to have segregation one way or another, even 20 years after Brown versus Board of Education. We get Milliken versus Bradley. So in other words, it turned back decades of potential progress for racially desegregated schools in the United States. So those of us that teach America's racial history have taught Milliken versus Bradley for a long time. Decades have gone by where historians have talked about this. And there's been at least one other book about Milliken versus Bradley, and there's been dozens of other articles, perhaps hundreds of other articles. Michelle Adams' The Containment is the definitive book about Milliken versus Bradley, period. It's the book that you go to learn about what Milliken versus Bradley was, how it unfolded in Detroit, and also what it means for the United States of America. The book is a stunning accomplishment. Adams is a native of Detroit, an attorney, and the daughter of a pioneering attorney, also in Detroit. And she takes the case of Milliken versus Bradley and uses it to interrogate the meaning of racial justice in the North. She opens with the moment taken out of her own career and uses that to reframe the meaning of Brown versus Board of Education. She tells us, and I quote, "Milliken versus Bradley is where the promise of Brown versus Board of Education ended." And so this book is about that process. It's told through an incredible cast of characters, from Thurgood Marshall and Albert Klieg to Mitt Romney's dad. Adams opens up with a nation in the late 1960s engulfed in this battle over the struggle of race in America, and she takes us through the national context with a tight focus on the evolution of black schools and activism in Detroit. In other words, she offers this long and deep history of a local story to help us understand the national context and what's going on and what it means for the entire country. The research, the writing is incredible. This is a very murky story that affects all parts of America, but she renders it so clear in The Containment. It gives us all these different perspectives, from school children to judges to other sorts of students to white opponents of busing. Her historical register takes us to all these different places. A lot of us think of a musical register, all the different notes on the chord you could hit. But she uses all sorts of different sources and puts us in all sorts of different moments, from a young child on the back of the bus to the highest levels of presidential politics. And throughout, we get these just incredible stories all throughout the book. You know, it's one big story, the book itself, but there's so many little things that change, and people pass away, and people fail, and they thrive, and all these different things happen. And it's just this incredible story about her hometown. And also one of these histories. Sometimes there's a history that you finish and you realize there's only one person that could have written a book like that. And this is exactly the case with The Containment. The containment here refers to the processes by which black life was contained in American cities as opportunities for white people opened elsewhere. And I think I and many of the jurors took it to mean even more. If you understand that Brown versus Board of Education was decided based on the 14th Amendment, Reconstruction Amendments, the 14th Amendment is the basis of Brown versus Board of Education. That's what they cited when they decided Brown versus Board of Education. And if you understand that, then the containment means not just containing Brown versus Board of Education to the south. That's a southern problem. It's not a northern problem. We're not going to go as far as what the original letter of the law said. But it also means to contain Reconstruction to the 19th century and the problems of the 19th century in such a way that limits our citizenship in many cases today. It's not just a book about one Supreme Court case over education. It is a book about residential segregation. It's a book about white flight. It's a book about America's racial politics. It's a book about racial injustice. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a book that, much more than most, helps explain the maddening and lingering racial divisions that we still have in this country, even after all that we've been through. So I just want to invite everybody to please join me in thanking Michelle Adams and congratulating her for The Containment, winner of the 2025 Stone Book Prize.
Good evening. I'm Callie Crossley. This is one of my favorite events. I'm delighted to be here because this work is so exciting, and it's particularly exciting tonight with Michelle Adams' book. Thank you so much, Professor, for laying the foundation for my conversation with Michelle Adams tonight. I want to start, and I'm going to ask Michelle to read from the book shortly, but I just want to have you address one thing right off the bat, because she approaches this work from two lenses, as you heard the professor say, from her hometown perspective and as a legal scholar. So with those two things coming together, what was it that triggered your interest in writing a book that took you 12 years to write?
Well, Callie, I'm going to answer that, but first I've got to say something, and that is thank you. I thank the jurors, I thank the museum, I thank everyone who made this possible. Thank you, Pam. The foundation, I was thinking earlier today about how important this was, what a moment it was, both for me, but also for the people and the ideas in this book. And I thought about my parents who have both passed, and I thought, oh, I wish they had lived to see this. And then I realized that they had, and that they are here today with us. And it's that spirit that I think animates what you all are trying to do here, and what we talk about when we say the word history. History lives through us. It speaks through us. And we know that we have to honor it, and that we have to share it, and that it grounds us and helps us think about how we can move forward. History is a living thing, just like our Constitution is a living thing. And so I thank you all for this moment, and I thank you for this extraordinary honor, and I thank you for allowing me to be in this room. Now, Kelly, I think you were asking what maybe...
What was the moment that triggered you, given your two lenses in which you approached this material to write this book?
Well, you know, my friends who are here and my wife who's here know that I'm a little on the obsessive side when I get something that I'm really, really interested in, and this was a case that I kept reading about, and I'm glad that you teach it, undergrad. In law school, this is what we call a note case. It's not particularly well appreciated. We talk about Brown, we talk about some of the other cases around Brown, but Milliken versus Bradley is usually an afterthought. It's a has-been. And I kept reading about it and recognized that there was an incredible story there, and that I really wanted to try to tell it. And I wanted to try to tell it because I'm a native of Detroit, and the case takes place in Detroit. And so I thought I had an opportunity, and I didn't want to let it go.
Okay. The book is divided into three parts. The first is called Soul Force, the second is The Containment, and the third is Milliken versus Bradley. Now, Soul Force really dives into all of the characters that the professor mentioned before, that some of them I never heard of, but a few names you might know, like a very young Coleman Young. But the essence of that piece of the book is really to alert all of us, once again, that black parents were just in it to try to get good education for their kids. And they were going to fight, and they were going to continue to fight, and they were going to come up with 5 different ways of fighting, and then they were going to go back again. Sometimes that gets lost. This is so clear in the way that you laid it out with both those who were leading the discussions and the people in the community. Just a little bit about why this piece is so important for us to understand.
I think it's so important. I mean, I think that education has always been a pillar of the black community, right? And the drive that black parents have had to get the best possible education for their children. And this moment in time was no different. And so you had in Detroit and in other northern cities, and I'm talking about the distinction between the North and the South, one of the things that is, I think, understood is that many black parents were demonstrating, boycotting, pushing northern school systems to provide equal educational opportunity. And many of those parents believe that the best way to do that is through an integrated schools, because they believed that, in effect, green follows white. But this was incredibly important, and there were differences of opinion as to sort of how best to go about this, as there always have been in black political thought and black strategy. But the end game was always clear, and that was shared. And what was shared was the desire for high quality education for all students.
And to be clear, not everybody agreed on the way.
No.
So there was a lot of disagreement in how it should happen, but they were united in this has got to change.
Absolutely.
Okay. So now second part is the containment. That's the whole name of the book. What surprised me is that, of course, when you speak of containment, you're talking about policies, procedures that were in place, but there's actually a physical containment in Detroit, an actual wall.
Yeah,
Please talk to people about
And
this.
I want to talk about that, but I think William really sort of got us thinking about the ways in which the containment operates both as a physical wall in the city of Detroit and as a metaphor, right? As containing the idea of sort of Brown, or containing the idea of the scope of what it means to be an American citizen, or this was making a distinction between the 19th and the 20th century. the containment is in effect the movable ghetto, right? What was happening in Detroit was that black folks were being contained in the center city of Detroit by a variety of different kinds of mechanisms, and many of us in this room know what they are: racially restrictive covenants and racially discriminatory public housing and redlining and things of this nature. And so they really didn't have any choices in terms of where they wanted to live. And then the school authorities said, well, you know what, we're just going to drop the schools on top of that, right? So we're going to have a neighborhood school system. School authorities say, we don't know why the schools are segregated, but you're in a neighborhood school, and we're going to basically just say that's where you're going to go to school. But specifically on containment, this was an idea that came up in the trial that ultimately became Milliken versus Bradley, and it was about the idea that black folks couldn't choose where they wanted to live, and they were living in certain parts of the city, and they basically could not get out. And then specifically, I think what you're referring to is a wall. And what I learned through my research, which I didn't know growing up in Detroit.
I didn't know this. This is
for
crazy.
18 years was that the federal government basically said that if you wanted to get homeowners mortgages that were guaranteed by the federal government, a developer wanted to build. But it was an area that basically had a black community. He said, well, you know, if you want us to sort of basically give federal backing for those loans, you're going to have to put up a wall. An actual segregation wall exists about 1.5 miles from where I grew up, and I had no idea. And you would never know it if you went there. Now today, because there's graffiti and because it's been understood, and because of the work of local communities, you would understand it, but you wouldn't have known what it was. And it was there because the federal government required it to be there in order for the federal funds to flow. And so that is a literal segregation wall, but it also, I think, it captures sort of the kinds of things and the ways in which segregation was happening. Northern Jim Crow. We had a nationwide system of Jim Crow, and we just had various sort of regional variations. We had a southern variation and we had a northern variation, and my book is about the northern variation of Jim Crow.
So let's talk more about that context, because as we've said, Brown was 1954, then the next Brown, 55, and now we're in 1970 when we start this. 1970. And what's been happening during that part is that schools in the South have been fighting in their communities about integrating these schools. But what's been happening above the Mason-Dixon line is not much.
Parents are protesting.
Yes.
Parents are protesting. They read the newspaper, they understand what the Constitution says, and they say Brown. They see Brown. And they think, well, our schools are segregated too. Why can't we have integrated, desegregated schools in the North, right? But the big question was Brown just a Southern case? Did it just apply below the Mason-Dixon line? Was it just a case that said, well, if the state requires there to be segregation, then Brown applies? Or was Brown nationwide, right? Was Brown a recognition that, in fact, we had a nationwide system of Jim Crow? And so Brown was operative across the United States. Black parents believed that it was. And what's hard about the Supreme Court is it speaks in Brown 1 in 54 and Brown 2 in 55, and then for the most part it basically sort of pulls back. And it's not until 1968 that it speaks again, but again, it's talking about what's going on in the South in 68. William talked about the Swan case, which was 1971. Again, this is a Southern case. So as this case is beginning in Detroit, there's no direction, there's no guidance from the United States Supreme Court. Does Brown apply here or not? And this is the void into which the lawyers stepped. This was what was so fascinating about what they did was, this is great lawyering. And what I try to do is bring the reader into, how did the lawyers make these decisions? What were they thinking about? What would you have done if you were trying to prove a case against northern school authorities, but the Supreme Court hadn't told you exactly what to do? How do you do this? And I pivot and I invite you to think about that as well. And so, basically, they do this, and they prove their case, and they are able to show that, in fact, there was a Brown violation in the North. And we have a judge who sort of begins to be quite sort of, I don't think this case really means anything, and then ultimately sort of sees and understands how Northern Jim Crow was operating. And then we get to the question of, well, if there's a constitutional violation, what do you do about it? What's the remedy for the constitutional violation? In the South, it had been desegregation, right? Is the remedy in the North desegregation? And if the remedy in the North is desegregation, how far does that go? Just to the city of Detroit? Or do we go beyond the city of Detroit lines? Do we include all of southeastern Michigan in a desegregation order because we're not trying to have desegregation theater, we're going to have meaningful desegregation, right? And so that's really the question, and the trial judge says we're going to have meaningful desegregation, and that's ultimately the question that gets the United States Supreme Court in a case called Milliken versus Bradley.
So this is called Jim Crow North. As you go to the book to prepare to read this section, I just want to say that one of the brilliance pieces of this book is that you have layered on top all of the pieces of the cases that came together to be, in the end, that helped us see how we got to Milliken versus Bradley, how this all came together. And I don't think I had some vague notion that something happened, but I think it was way better in the North. I never thought that there were these kinds of intense struggles going on.
Well, I mean, thank you, but it's also, this was the job that I gave myself. My job was not to write just to lawyers and law students in prose. I wanted to hold my prose, right? But I wanted to write a book for everyone. I wanted to invite them into my constitutional law class. And I wanted to do it in a way that didn't dumb it down, but to bring everyone into the conversation. Because this is our shared history, which is alive, and this is our Constitution, which belongs to the people of the United States. And so that was the task in this book, was to figure out a way to do that. And that's why I love when you say, I didn't know this was going on and now I get it, because that was my job. That was my job.
I just want to put in a little context. By the time we get to Milliken versus Bradley gets decided by the Supreme Court, it's 1974.
That's correct.
And guess what's happening in Boston? Hello. Hello, here we are, busing
I'll
and
let you take
segregation.
that.
Well, no, I just want to put that into context. They're about to play me off, so I need for you to read this section.
I forgot.
Because I believe this is a beautiful sum up of some of the issues that we've been talking about.
Okay, so this is towards the end of the book, and I'm just going to read a little bit for you here, so thank you. Why was Detroit so important? Grant, who's a big journalist that I talk about throughout the book, Grant's answer was that Detroit was both a very large school district and thus important in its own right, and a bellwether. The structure of the Detroit metropolitan area, a majority black city bounded by majority white suburbs with separate school districts, was far from unusual in the early 1970s. It was a metropolitan arrangement that had been prevalent from coast to coast. Grant wrote that a Supreme Court decision in the Detroit case would have sweeping implications not only for Detroit, but for most major US cities where predominantly black schools were surrounded by predominantly white suburban schools. Specifically, he wrote, many civil rights attorneys feared that a decision against metropolitan integration would, in effect, reestablish the separate but equal rule by permitting segregated black city schools and segregated white suburban schools. Grant was right in seeing that the Detroit litigation was a watershed. If the Supreme Court upheld Judge Roth, the ruling had the potential to become the judicial version of Rubikoff's path-breaking integration bill. Rubikoff is Senator Rubikoff from the state of Connecticut, who I talk about earlier in the case. Earlier in the book, knitting together city and suburb from coast to coast. That bill's failure suggested that judicial action was the most promising avenue for blacks to have access to the benefits of suburban schools. In fact, the Detroit and Richmond school cases weren't the only lawsuits testing the possibility of metropolitan desegregation, as the New York Times reported. In the article on the cert grant, certiorari is what you do when you ask the Supreme Court to hear your case, the paper observed that several cases with potential to result in similar city-suburban school desegregation plans are pending in a number of cities, including Atlanta, Buffalo, Hartford, Indianapolis, Louisville, and Wilmington, Delaware. A Supreme Court ruling upholding Roth would likely green light metropolitan desegregation in the pending cases and create an incentive for other plaintiffs to bring copycat lawsuits. There was yet another reason why the cert grant in Bradley versus Milliken was so monumental: the trial record. The proofs the plaintiffs put on in Detroit did much more than provide the evidence necessary to convince the trial court judge to assign liability to the defendants. The trial record in Bradley versus Milliken was special. It read like a novel. The record didn't just explain how the Detroit Public School Authority segregated the schools, nor did it simply elucidate the housing schools nexus. Instead, it was a roadmap, an explainer, a treatise on Northern Jim Crow. It was almost unimaginable, after having read the trial transcripts, that one could sustain the belief that racial segregation in the North wasn't the result of racial discrimination, which, in turn, was deeply embodied in governmental policy. The record indicted government at every level for segregating schools, for segregating neighborhoods, and for creating the stark racial divisions between city and suburb. This was the Northern Jim Crow story, as it had unfolded day after day in Judge Roth's courtroom in downtown Detroit. That story involved multiple actors, levels of government, and time frames. It was complicated and at times Byzantine, but it was comprehensible. It was knowable. The record the NAACP compiled and Judge Roth and the Sixth Circuit, which is the Intermediate Court of Appeals, reaction to it, twice was profoundly threatening to the racial status quo. It encompassed the containment, snakes in the basement, physical segregation barriers that resembled prison walls, redlining, racially restrictive covenants, white neighborhood associations with violent tendencies, segregated public housing, racially separate real estate salespersons associations, and school authorities that hovered it all up when they insisted on neighborhood schools. The record was vertigo-inducing. It was so powerful that it could prompt a shift in one's worldview. This was exactly what happened to Judge Roth, who then acted in accordance with those changed beliefs. For some, this was a terrifying prospect. At the core of Bradley versus Milliken was the Northern Jim Crow story, how it happened, who was responsible, and what it might take to heal an open wound. If more Americans learned that story, if more understood that history, perhaps they might undergo a similar conversion, perhaps.
That's Michelle Adams. The book is The Containment. We're going to ask Benjamin and Anna to join us. We have a few minutes for questions for any of them. You know, if y'all don't raise your hands, I will keep asking because I got plenty of questions. Okay, here's one. Okay.
Thank you. My question is for Professor Adams. Professor, if I dare to summarize your book in one sentence, I would say the history that you chronicle is the history of democracy in action and separation of power. 2025, at the federal level, the power is not separated. Mm-hmm. We are under a soft dictatorship. How do we fight back?
It's an easy question. All I can tell you is what I've learned over the 12 years when I was writing this book. And the characters that I most admired in this book, in fact, all of them, were committed to something that I think we need to hang on to desperately, and that's our democracy. This book is the American story. We talked to someone made that comment earlier on. The American story. It's our story, it's our history, but it's a story of trying to, it's about the promise of Brown, but it's about the promise of what our democracy could be. And so I don't know that I can answer your question fully. I wish that I could. I think all I can tell you is that the process of this made me recommit even more strongly to democracy. And if we lose this, and I pray that we won't, I will be the last person to let it go.
I don't see any hands, so let me ask a question of all three of you. The work that you've done, the content in your books, is all the stuff that's being pulled off shelves and protested everywhere at this moment. So I'd love to get your response to that and, you know, what you think about it. I mean, because you're all, in some ways, under scrutiny because of what you're writing about. I'll start with you, Benjamin.
I think students and scholars of history, to some extent, knew this was coming. Maybe not with such veracity, and maybe not with such a charlatan that is so brilliantly narcissistically embodies these demons in our body politic. But the second Jim Crow, the northern Jim Crow that was not resolved, the legacies of slavery that have not been addressed through reparations and systematic economic and social reform, and in my case, the legacies of Reconstruction, which was the only, in my mind, meaningful interracial democratic movement in the South that I have studied up until this moment. Each of these movements and their twinned white supremacist mob-like violence that prevents the emergence of these new publics it continues to live like a tumor in our collective consciousness. In other words, these books are getting taken off shelves because they're doing their job. There is both, it's a contradiction because there's only so much that organized thought can do, and yet without organized thought and without theory to guide us as a collective entity, we cannot successfully excise this cancer from ourselves. So I think ultimately the resolution of these factors is going to take place in other domains and fields, and yet we still have to keep writing about it, and we have to be fearless, and those of us who have privilege, like I do as a white man, should be willing to risk everything as if they didn't.
Okay. Anna? Do you have a mic? You don't have a mic. Do you have a mic? No, all right, let me give you a mic. Okay.
Thank you so much for this question. Perhaps I will be a little bit optimistic. I was born and raised in a country during the Cold War when we had more than 20 years of a military dictatorship. So where censorship in books and people would go to prison and disappear because they had certain books, even novels, in their homes. I think that those of us who are historians, the importance of the work that we do is that we can have some perspective in what is happening now, and many of what is happening now has been happening for many years, not only in the United States, but elsewhere as well. In the United States, when the civil rights movement was happening in this country, in the country from where I come from, in Brazil, there was no civil rights movement there. There was a military dictatorship that made illegal then black parties in a country where the majority of the population is black. So I think that it helps us to look beyond the United States in order to see this moment in a way that perhaps with more nuance. This is happening elsewhere as well, had happened in the past. Only when I was writing my book, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil said that the Portuguese never set foot in Africa, which is a lie, and Bolsonaro is going to jail. So I think that we have, the books will continue to be read. This is the year that we had the largest number of submissions. No matter how many books they burn or they take off the libraries, people will continue to read and to share and to talk with each other. And I think that this is what we should continue doing here and elsewhere.
You have 10 seconds. You have 10 seconds before Dr. Trent needs to wrap us up here.
Living in a democracy is exhausting. But we have to recommit. I think that every year you've gotten more submissions. We have to keep doing our jobs, right? And however we define what our job is, we have to continue to do our job. I don't believe we're going to lose this. I don't believe that we're going to lose this. But we have to continue to recommit to persuading folks that we may not agree with and who may not agree with us to join us in perfecting what it is to be an American and to be an American citizen.
All right, Dr. Trent. Thank you all.
Well, thank you, Callie Crossley, Michelle Adams. Let's give another round of applause for our authors as well. Ana Lucia Araujo, Benjamin Barson. So did you enjoy this evening? If you enjoyed this evening and you believe that the Museum of African American History should continue to do its work by offering programs like this, by being a convener, by being a pillar to stand against the tides that are shifting in this world, I'm going to encourage you to do something. I know there's a slide around here somewhere, but it's also in your bulletin, in your program. Support the museum. We are in the fight of our lives, but we cannot do it without you. We need our community now more than ever. So think about it, figure out a way what makes sense for you. But we encourage you to continue to do this so we can continue to stand up as a voice of democracy and the voices of the ancestors who occupied and built this place. All right, that's enough of my soapbox speech. Let's get back to some details. So, if you enjoyed this, we want to encourage you to join us on October 25th at the Boston Book Festival, where we'll be having a panel with some of our previous finalists called Looking Back at Civil Rights, Division, and Disillusionment. We want to thank the staff of the Museum of African American History. They're around here, but they're also working. So if you see them, thank them. We also want to thank the staff of the Stone Foundation, Jim and Kathy Stone, for your continued support. Sonia Plessett, my dear colleague, Executive Director of the Stone Foundation, the Boston Foundation for their continued support, our jurors, our honorary jurors, Deborah Stevens, Handel and Haydn Society, audio chemist, Evolution Sound. And this evening would not be possible. We've talked about her before. She's in the back in her orange jumper, looking at the time, Pam Waterman. Director of the Stone Book Awards, and Michelle Samplin Salgado, as well as our numerous volunteers. Now, let's talk technicals. Some of you received a golden ticket. All right, that means that you get to take one of the books, signed books, if you have a ticket. Now, if you do not have a ticket, or you perhaps can't choose between one, take one from the free table, and we do have a retail space down there where you can buy another copy of one of the other selections this evening. We thank you for coming out, for celebrating scholarship in African American history and culture. Thank you for those of you who are watching online. Please continue to support the museum, and we'll see you again next year.